Today we're going to study in Mirza Hashem another chapter in Hilchos Shabbos, this one about Lechem Mishna. When Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sustained them with the man. The man would come down every day, daily, and the shear of the man that came down was an omer for each person, omer per head. You weren't allowed to take more than an omer. And if you did, then it would spoil by the next day. On Yom HaShabbos, there was no man that came down from Shomayim, and there was a twofold miracle. First, on Friday, there was a double portion. And secondly, one portion of those two that was collected on Friday would be left over for Shabbos. And later on in Mirza Hashem, we'll get a chance to talk about how they divided it up over the meals of Shabbos. But it was the second miracle that the man, which by its very essence would spoil if it was left for the next day, but not the man of Friday. The extra portion of the omer of man on Friday did not spoil. Now, all this will lead us to Lechem Mishna. Lechem Mishna, in a sense, is a replica of Vayehi Bayom HaShishi Loktu Lechem Mishna. And the Gemara in Shabbos and Daf Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Beis is going to quote Rabbi Abba, who's going to learn from Lechem Mishna that we are required to take Lechem Mishna on Shabbos as well. At least a minimum of 2 meals of Shabbos. It could be even the third meal of Shabbos might require Lechem Mishna, but for sure, the Friday night and the Shabbos day meal requires Lechem Mishna. And the question here as to whether or not this is an asmachta is covered, is addressed by the Kolbo, who lived maybe about 6 centuries ago. The Kolbo was of the opinion that this is not a regular asmachta. Usually when we talk about an asmachta, the mitzvah itself doesn't appear in the Torah. You won't find the definition of the mitzvah in the Torah. You may find an allusion, a remez, and then it's really a drabanan. But here, the words from which Rabbi Abba derives the chiyuv of Lechem Mishna are written in the Torah. It says Lechem Mishna. And Rabbi Abba is telling us that when the Torah uses that term Lechem Mishna, it's redundant. It's not necessary in the pasuk. The pasuk didn't have to say Lechem Mishna. That very specific way in which the Torah formulated that indicates that this is a mitzvah to take Lechem Mishna. So we should be very careful, according to the Kolbo, about Lechem Mishna. It's not just a regular asmacht, but it's really a mitzvah. The Aruch HaShulchan in Orach Chaim Simon Reish Ayin Dalid refers to this concept of the Kolbo and tells us that this is a din Torah. This is a din Doraisa that we have to take Lechem Mishna. In other sources, for example, the Eliyahu Rabbah, which is about 2.5 centuries ago, he writes that Lechem Mishna is purely D'Rabbanan, and Rabbi Abba's derivation of Lechem Mishna as a chiyuv, based on the pasuk Lechem Mishna, V'loktu Lechem Mishna, is only an asmach. Meaning, to summarize everything we've been saying, Lechem Mishna for sure is obligatory. No one questions that. Lechem Mishna for sure is a replica, a zecher of the man that came down, double portion on Friday, with 2 different miracles. The machlokes is whether or not Lechem Mishna is a din d'oraisa or it's a d'rabbanan with a regular smach. And we can line it up as a machlokes between the Kolbo and the Eliyahu Rabbah. All that we have on the first of your pages which is numbered 35. That number will be published in Mirza Hashem in a few months. This is what you're looking at in the galleys of a book. On page 36, we actually quote Rabbi Abba from the Gemara in Shabbos Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Beis. Rabbi Abba, b'Shabbos chayev adam livtzoa al shtei kikros shenemar Lechem Mishna. The Gemara goes on and tells us about the minhag of Rav Kahana. And the one who testifies to this minhag is none other than Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi tells us, he saw Rav Kahana. And what did Rav Kahana do? Ochez b'Shabbos b'yado shtei kikros. He would hold on to 2 kikros. Umevarech aleim hamotzi. Avol hayabotzeach rak b'yachas mihen. He only sliced one of the 2 breads. So the bracha he made over 2 breads, shlemos, holding them in his hand, and then he cut one of those 2 columns, one of those 2 kikros. Rashi explains, why did he grab onto 2 kikros and then cut only 1? Because the pasuk says, "Laktu Lechem Mishna." The word "laktu," which means they collected Lechem Mishna. In our terms, we're not going out there collecting man, but we are holding on to Lechem Mishna. They collected on Friday a double portion, and we hold on to the double portion, meaning 2 kikros. However, the pasuk doesn't say that they sliced both kikros. And therefore, Rav Kahana understood that although the lekita, which is lekicha, or achiza, if you want to call it, that was on shtei kikros, but nevertheless, the actual bitzia, the cutting, is only on one of the 2 kikros. Now, we could perhaps embellish the idea of Rav Kahana on a deeper level, relying here on the Sefer HaMichtam in Masechta Brachos, who says that Rav Kahana wanted to make a zecher for not just 1 miracle, but for 2 miracles. The double Omer that came down on Friday, as we indicated before, brought about 2 miracles. One miracle, of course, is the fact that on Friday they had a double portion, because on Shabbos they had no man coming down from Shemayim. And that is demonstrated by the fact that we take in our hands 2 kikros, according to Rav Kahana. However, when it comes to slicing the bread, here we want to indicate the second miracle, namely that you could put away one of the kikros, one of the omer of man, for tomorrow. That's also a miracle. Because as we said, the Torah tells us about the nature of man, that it can't last until the next day. It totally disintegrates. It even smells funny. The Torah calls it hivish. And the miracle was that the second portion of the Omer of Friday that was left over for Shabbos did not disintegrate. And therefore, by cutting 1 challah, you're indicating that the other is for tomorrow, and that's another miracle. Now, again, Rabbi say it doesn't mean that if Rav Kahana had many, many guests at his table, he would make sure to eat only one of the 2 kikros. But the way that you make the brach of hamotzi and then go ahead and cut the kikar, that indicates and demonstrates the double miracle of the man. And Rabosai, again, I just want to make a comment here. All this is brand new to me. You may know this. We have people here in the audience who have their rebbeim and great rebbeim. So you probably heard this 30 years ago, and you have your notes from 30 years ago. But to me personally, this is brand new. I never heard this before, that there were two miracles in the double portion of man on Friday, and that's what Rav Kahana had in mind, says the Sefer HaMichtam, when he wanted you on the one hand to make the brach of Hamotzi while you're holding both kikros, but on the other hand, he wanted you to cut one of the two kikros. We'll see later on, the Gaon has a totally different minhag, the Vilna Gaon. But I want to focus now on the Sefer HaMichtam, who is just simply giving us an insight into Rav Kahana's minhag. And if somebody has Rav Kahana's minhag, following that tradition that you cut only one of the two chalas, of the love brach, he is standing on the shoulders of Rav Kahana. That's not bad. But more than that, he should understand why Rav Kahana had that minhag. That he, in effect, by cutting one of the two chalas, is declaring, not in so many words, he's implying, I guess you would say, that there's another kikar that he's putting away for tomorrow, and that, as a replacement for the man, was a second miracle. Very gishma.
So, Rav,
yeah,
would you say then that that's only a mitzvah for Friday night?
No. I'm not saying that. There was a great miracle in the fact that on Shabbos he could also have another kikar. So there's another Zeichel L'Nes on Shabbos. And by taking two kikros on Shabbos, he's indicating that the reason why he has two kikros on Shabbos is because of the miracle of Friday that two kikros fell, a double Omer portion that fell. Okay. Now it's very interesting here in the Hegyonei Halacha, and I always mention the name of the author, Rav Yitzchak Mirsky Shlita, is that he quotes a comment of one of the Talmidim of the Gaon, Rav Shlomo Vilkomir, which is, at least again, I have to admit, brand new to me. And honestly, I don't know much about what's called the Masorah. Masorah is a technical word that refers to the literature of how exactly the words in the Torah should be vocalized. The nekudos. A lot of it has to do with grammar. You have to know Hebrew grammar inside out. Something that, I was at the feet of Rav Soloveitchik for 5 years. He never got into that. So it was like not part of my curriculum. So that's why I'm very interested in this. And I hope I'll bring you along with me. Sometimes if a teacher is excited and passionate, he brings the other students with him and they get excited too. So that's what I'm hoping for. Now, in order to appreciate this, we really have to take a little bit of a break. And I have to ask each one of you, if you can, to open up a Chumash, Sefer Shmos, or if you have all the 5 books of Moses in one volume, that's even easier. I'm going to just get my Chumash here. It's on the table. And we open up to Parshas Beshalach, the Parsha of the Man, and we read Perek Tes Zayin, and we're going to focus on 2 psukim. Pasuk Chaf and Pasuk Chaf Dalet. So we're in the 16th chapter of the book of Shmos, and we're looking in the 16th chapter at verses 20 and 24. Below Shamuel Moshe, the Parsha of Man with all its glory and its incredible supernatural, miraculous nature, but it also has a harsh side to it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu used man as an nisayon, as a test to the Jewish people, and unfortunately, many of them failed the test. And that's what this first pasuk is about. Lo shamu el Moshe. Moshe said that as a general rule, they should eat the omer on a daily basis and not leave anything over for the next day. It's like nosar, in kutch, you can't leave it over for the next day. Unfortunately, they did. And the Torah testifies, Vayarum Toloim, it was attacked by the bugs. And then it says Vayivash. And it disintegrated. It had a bad smell to it. And then it says Vayitzof Alei Moshe. The word came through social media, and Moshe opened up his email or something, and he found out that the people left over their omer for the next day. And he got angry because they had violated the command of God. But notice, please, and you'll have to write this down. If we had a big board, I would write it down. We actually do have a board here, but I can't find the magic marker. But write down that the sequence here is Toloim first, and then Vayivash. The spoilage comes after the Toloim, which is very strange. But if you take a look at Pasuk Chav Daled, and those who on Friday collected a double portion, leaving one portion, one omer for the next day, meaning for Shabbos, Kasher Tziva Moshe. Now watch that. V'lo hivish v'rima lo haisavo. There was no spoilage, and the worms did not crawl in. On a biological level, that second record, which is recorded in Pasuk Chav Daled, is kidarko, is normal. Alpi, the following nature. When something spoils, then the worms are attracted to something spoiled. The toloim come. The process of hisliah comes after the process of hivish. So Pasuk Chav Daled is exactly a reflection of what should have happened al pi derech hatem. But in Pasuk Chav, the order is reversed. And instead, the Toloim are mentioned and then Vayivash, which is very, very strange. Rashi notices this, and he writes Vayivash in Pasuk Chav, Mikra Hafuch. Hafuch, it's Puk Fakir. Shevetchila Hivish, Ubisof Hitliah. First it becomes spoiled, and that attracts all the maggots and the worms and the other bugs. Inyan Shenemar, and I'll prove it to you, says Rashi, that the Derech Ha'olam is just the opposite, because take a look in Pasuk Chav Daled. And there it says, V'lo hivish, v'rima lo haisavo. And there, kol ha'to'avitu lo'en. Okay, fine. Rashi is telling me that there's a problem here, and he calls it a mikra hafel. But Rashi gives us absolutely no clue as to what this phenomenon of a mikra hafel is. Why? This Reb Shlomo from the city of Vilna, he actually came from a different city, but he studied in Vilna. He comes to add a very interesting point, which comes from the Masorah that I mentioned earlier, and it's a grammatical observation in terms of Hebrew grammar. But again, it has to do with combining vocal nekudos, what we call punctuation, with tamei mikra. If you combine those two systems, then there's a very strange phenomenon in Pasuk Chav, in the word vayivash. Notice that vayivash has an asnachta. Asnachta is more or less a sof pasuk. When a word ends with two letters, the last word in a sentence, or in a case of an asmachta, that last word on which there's an asmachta, then a pasach becomes a kommas. And again, if we had time, we would really research this. We'll find it all over the Tanakh. So therefore, the word vayivash should be written vayivash with a kommas. But the Masorah has it as vayivash. And that's how we're going to read the word. This in itself indicates what Rashi calls a mikra hafuch. There's something that is antithetical in this very word itself. Not only, as Rashi points out, the sequence, that first is vayorim toloim, the toloim come, and then vayivash, but also it should have said vayivash. And instead, the Masorah has it vayivash with a pasach under the aleph, to tell you that the word vayivash is out of place. In truth, the asnachta belongs under the word toloim, and the word vayivash should come before vayorim toloim, because in the sequence of the physics, first you have vayivash, and then you have vayorim toloim. And therefore, the word toloim is the word of the asmachta in truth, in terms of the reflection of the reality of what happened. And the word vayivash should be earlier in the pasuk, before vayorim toloim, and therefore gets a pasach instead of a kommas. So the Torah, by adding, or I should say changing a kommas, which was the way it should have been written, to a pasach, is already telling you, it's an indication that this word is out of place in the pasuk. It should not be toloim and then vayivash, because the vayivash comes before the toloim in the physics of the universe. Whereas in Pasuk Chav Daled, there the Torah says v'lohiv ish, and therefore v'rima lo haisabam, which is the derech of the universe. So we now have two indications that mikra hafuch, that Chav, Pasuk Chav is a mikra hafuch. First of all, in terms of the sequence, vayorim toloim before vayivash, and secondly, in the fact that vayivash is located in the pasuk where it shouldn't be located. It should be earlier in the pasuk, and therefore it should have a pasach only because it really belongs before vayorim toloim. But the way it is in the pasuk is very strange. It doesn't deserve a pasach, it deserves a kommas, because an asmachta, which is called a pesach, a hefsek, always converts the pasach into a kommas. So this is the mikra hafuch. Says Reb Shlomo, the rational mind begs to understand why the pasuk is written in that way. Rashi is saying hafuch, and we're saying that based on the Masorah and the fact that there's an aleph means that the vayivash actually took place, it occurred before the toloim came. Toloim are attracted after there's vayivash. But why didn't the Torah write it that way? That's the way it happened. What is this? Ein mukto meuchar b'Torah? It's joking with me. I can't tell if anyone's laughing here because all I see is names on the screen. But at least I'm laughing. So my father, Zichron Livracha, would always laugh at his own jokes more than anyone else did. And he says the following, Rav Shlomo. the pasuk has two parts to it. Actually, three parts, we could say. One part is the violation on the part of the Jewish people. The last part of the pasuk, I'm skipping the middle, is the anger that was incurred by Moshe. And in the middle, the physics of what happened as a result of this violation when the people left over the Omer. And that is the Vayivash and the Vayoram Torah. Now, I said to you that Moshe Rabbeinu knew about this phenomenon that had taken place, this Avera, based on social media. But the truth is, I have to admit, and it pains me to say this, Moshe Rabbeinu did not have social media. He didn't even have WhatsApp. So how did Moshe Rabbeinu find out that these people had violated and they left over the Omer? What did he go around with, with telescopes looking into every OL to see whether they're leaving over the Omer because they didn't have trust and faith in the Almighty that tomorrow there'll be another Omer coming down from Shemayim? The answer is he knew it because, as we say in Yiddish, das stinkt. It smelled. The smell was the social media that carried the news to Moshe Rabbeinu that the people had violated the law of the Torah. And therefore, the pasuk puts Vayivash after Vayoram Tolan. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know about the Tolan. What he knew about is the smell, the odor of spoiled man. Now, I don't know what spoiled man smells like, but apparently Vayivash means it didn't smell too good. And Moshe knew there's something here that doesn't smell right, as we say in proverbial English. And what doesn't smell right is the fact that they left over the Omer without relying on Hashem for the next day. And at this point, it fascinates me that Rav Mirsky Shlipa felt compelled to share with us another insight from the same Reb Shlomo, from the Talmidim of the Gaon, because this second Chiddush, although it has nothing to do with Lechem Mishna, but it indicates the methodology. There's a certain consistency in the way the man read the Torah. In this case, it's Tanakh, and we're going to learn a pasuk that we're all familiar with in Sefer Yeshaya Hanavi. And this you'll see on the bottom of page 37, which would be the third page in your sequence. Tachas hanatzutz yaleh barosh, tachas hasirpad yaleh hadas, vayol Hashem l'shem lios olam lo yikaris. Now, what happens here is that natzutz and sarpad are weeds that are very destructive to a garden. And Yeshayahu, in his glorious prophecy of the end of days, is telling us that these weeds will be replaced. In the case of a natzotz, it would be brosh. In the case of a sirpad, it would be hadas. A beautiful replacement of weeds with fragrant smelling herbs. The weeds, al pi Torah shebal peh, are metaphors for some of the most evil adversaries of the Jewish people during the history of our nation. Whereas the brush and the hadas are those great Jewish leaders that will destroy, overcome our enemies. And this is a Gemara Masechet Megillah on Daf Yud. You'll see it on page 38. Chazal say the following: Natzutz is a metaphor for Haman Harosh. Barash, that's the counter, the antithesis, the antidote to Haman Brush represents Mordechai. And the Gemara goes through the psukim. Sarpad is a metaphor for Vashti. She was probably as bad as Haman, or if not worse. I don't know. Anyway, a close second. And she will be replaced and defeated by Hadass Zu Esther. As the Tanakh says, Vayihi Omein Es Hadassah He Esther. Now the Bali Mesorah tell us that the word Hadass in this pasuk, again, you want to look back on the bottom of page 37, the word Hadass is written with a pasach under the dalet. That's against the laws of grammar. Because Hadass has an asnachta and splits the pasuk into half. And therefore, the dalet under Hadass should be a kamatz rather than a pasach. And once again, we're seeing another example of a kind of mikra hafel here. But the answer is because the word Hadass, although literally should be, in this context with an asnachta, a kamatz under the dalet, but it will get a pasach because it is a metaphor, an allusion for Hadassah. And Hadassah, Esther, has a pasach under the dalet. Stunning. I'd like to know if there's another religion on the face of the earth that can claim these kinds of analytic, beautiful understanding. It's just glorious. You know, Torah is endless. I would have added these two paragraphs to what's called a discovery program of Eshat Torah. Next time they call me up, but they don't have my name, but anyway. All right, let's get back now to Lechem Mishna. So at this point, again, we have to take a little break, although maybe it's not necessary, and we have to open up a Gemara. Because the Gemara in Shabbos now has 3 statements of 3 different Amoraim, and we have to weave through them. I have here a Gemara. The Shabbos Yud Zayin on the page. I happen to have a Mesifta. I'm a big Mesifta fan. Amar Rabbi Abba, as we mentioned earlier, the Shabbos Chayav Adam lived Soa al Shtei Kikros. Dichsiv, and I'll read the whole pasuk to you. It says, "Vayihi bayom hashishi loktu lechem mishna." Amar Rav Ashi chazino leilu Rav Kahana. I testify that I witnessed Rav Kahana did not tarti ubatzach chad. Amar Rav Kahana made the comment, the declaration. Loktu lechem mishna ksiv. And laktu means they held on to the 2 portions, the double portion of man, and we must therefore replicate that by holding on to the 2 kikros that represent the 2 omrim of man. And then we'll get to Rav Zera, which is the 3rd and last in this trio. But first, let's focus on Rabbi Abba, his statement, and the minhag of Rav Kahana. And the question that we're asking today is there a machlokes between the 2, or mar omar chad, mar omar chad, lo pligi? Rabbi Abba is giving an abstract formulation of the requirement, and Rav Kahana is fleshing it out and telling us exactly how to do it. And this turns out to be a machlokas rishonim. The rishonim are going to argue as to whether or not there is a machlokas between Rabbi Abba and Rav Kahana. And everything revolves about one word here in the formulation of Rabbi Abba. Lived so. Again, on Rabbi Abba, I'll read it again. B'Shabbos chayav adam lived so. al shtei kikros. What does the word livtsoa mean? Generally speaking, you learn Masechet Brachos, etc. The word livtsoa means to slice. In which case, there's an explicit machlokes here between Rabbi Abba and Rav Kahana, because Rabbi Abba says Chayav Adam livtsoa shtei kikros. He's got to slice both kikros. And again, in the footnote, we'll mention the Gaon's minute that he would slice all the kikros, no matter how many there were. The Arizal has a minute of 12 kikros. So imagine slicing 12 kikros. Whereas Rav Kahana, nokat tarte ubotza chada, but he only sliced one of the two kikros. And as we discussed earlier, that is a memory, a replication of the minhag that we leave one kikar for tomorrow. So this presentation is on page 39 in the name of the Shita Mekubetzes. Again, just to summarize, the Shita Mekubetzes has a machlokes between Rabbi Abba and Rav Kahana about the following question. Do we cut one of the two kikros or both? Rabbi Abba required both. Chayav Adam livtsoa, which the Shita Mekubetzes understood as cutting, shtei kikros. Rav Kahana said no. Botzea chada, you only slice one of the two kikros. That's the Shita Mekubetzes. Rashi doesn't seem to indicate this. Again, Rashi doesn't say much, but Rashi writes, livtsoa birkas hamotzi. It means that according to Rashi, when Rabbi Abba opens this whole sugya by saying on Shabbos Chayav Adam livtsoa, he wasn't going into the details about what you're supposed to do step by step. When do you make the bracha? When do you cut this? And so forth and so on. He was talking about the fact that when you recite Hamotzi, the rest of the week, I don't care if you have a shleima, I don't care if you have a prusa, I don't care if you have one shleima, if you have two shleimas, but on this night of Shabbos, and the same is true for the day of Shabbos, Hamotzi Lechem in arts has to be recited over two kikros shleimas. When do you cut the which or how many of the kikros you actually slice? That wasn't Rabbi Abba. That wasn't on Rabbi Abba's agenda. It was Rav Kahana, and Rav Ashi testified about what Rav Kahana did. He was the one who revealed to us the details about slicing the kikar, and he wanted you to slice one of the two kikros and not both. But Rabbi Abba never disagreed with him. That is the indication of Rashi. And there's a very interesting support for Rashi, because if you read Rabbi Abba carefully, there's an extra word. On Rabbi Abba, the Shabbos, I'm going to omit one word here for a second, just for pedagogical reasons. The Shabbos Chayav Adam livtsoa shtei kikros. If the Shita Mekubetzes is correct, and Rabbi Abba requires bitzia, meaning classical bitzia as we interpret it to mean slicing for both kikros, then he should have said Chayav Adam livtsoa shtei kikros. What is al shtei kikros? The extra word al is totally out of place, unless we assume, the way Rashi seems to assume, that Rabbi Abba is not talking about cutting the breads. He's talking about setting up shlemos for the purpose of Hamotzi Lechem Mishna. And therefore, livtsoa only indicates the general kloliistic action that he's chayav to do, and he's chayav to do Hamotzi on two kikros. The Hamotzi is on the two kikros, the kikros shlemos. Whether he cuts one or both, that wasn't addressed by Rabbi Abba at all. And now, Rabbosai, we are ready for the third of the trio, and that's Rabbi Zera. So if you happen to have the Gemara, if not, you'll listen carefully. Rabbi Zera halibotza akula sherusa. Sherusa means Seuda. Here the word Batza, according to all Rishonim, means to slice. But here we're not talking about how many kikros to slice, but what volume of the kikar should you slice? For what? For the Sherusa, for the Suda. You and I might have said, well, cut off a kazayas. And if you have 3 people at the table, cut off 3 zaysim, etc., etc. No. Says Rabbi Zera, what my minig is to be botzea akula sherusa, meaning for the entire seuda. And Rashi says that means prusa gidola, a very large piece of challah. Again, you can't do that with mini challahs, but if you have a large challah, then you should be slicing off a large piece. And apparently, what Rashi understood from Rabbi Zera and his minhag was that this is covered Shabbos. It's not covered Shabbos if I cut a small piece and then I finish that piece and I go back and I start cutting another piece and another piece. But rather what I want to do is cut for the entire Seudah, a large piece. That's covered Shabbos. However, some understood for Rashi that Rabbi Zera was not even making a comment about Lechem Mishna. He was saying that as a general rule, when you do B'tziyah and you cut bread from a shlema for the purpose of a meal, you should cut for the entire meal. And many Rishonim are upset about that because if that be the case, why is this Gemara here? Maybe it belongs to Masechta Brachas, but the entire context here is Lechem Mishna. It's a Shabbos halach. And therefore, they would rather understand that Rabbi Zera is giving us an insight into covered Shabbos. Amalei Ravina l'Ravashi. When Ravina heard about the minhag of Rabbi Zera, he objected. He said to Ravashi, how could Rabbi Zera do such a thing and cut off such a large piece? He looks like a gluttonous person that's cutting off such a large piece of bread. Amalei. So Ravashi responded, no. There's no problem of nira Kirav Tanusa here. Why? Because came into Chol Yom Alom Avidachi on a daily basis the whole week long. He doesn't cut such a large piece as if he's a big eater. And he's only doing it now on Shabbos, not the rest of the week. Lo Mischaze Kirav Tanuta. It's clear that he's doing it because it's Shabbos, and this is L'chvod Shabbos. And now the question is Rav Zera arguing with Rav Kahana, who came before him? Rav Kahana's minhag, as we said before, was to cut 2 kikros. And Rabbi Zera cut a large piece. Rashi seems to indicate that there's no connection whatsoever between Rabbi Zera and Rav Kahana. They're addressing 2 different questions. Each one is independent of the other. Whereas Rav Kahana is addressing the question of how many kikros he should cut into, he should slice. Rabbi Zera, in his minhag, was answering a different question. What's the shear? What is the volume of the bread that he's cutting off? Not how many breads, but the volume of the bread. And therefore, there's no machlokas between Rav Kahana and Rav Zera. Maro Amar Chadu, Maro Chad Lo Pligi, and we can be Mekayim Shneim. We can have both Rav Kahana and Rav Zera. If you ask me how many of the kikros should I slice, the answer is 2. How much should I slice for the meal? A very large piece. Not like I do the rest of the week. I want a large piece that'll last me through the Seudah, and this is part of Kavod HaSeudah, Kavod Shabbos. However, the Rashba is an unhappy camel. And his objections to Rashi you'll find here on page 40. That's the main paragraph that begins in the middle of page 4. Two objections to Rashi. First of all, if Rabbi Zera is asking a question about the shear, how much do I cut off when I slice the challah? Should it last for the whole meal, etc., etc.? That has nothing to do with Lechem Mishna. As we said before, in Rashi's frame of reference, we wonder why Rabbi Zera was quoted here and his minhag, which should apply theoretically the whole week long. It's only in the discussion between Ravina and Rav Ashi that we came to the conclusion that Rabbi Zera was discussing Shabbos, and he only did this on Shabbos. Furthermore, when Rashi says Akula Sherusa, Rashi interprets Akula Sherusa to mean Chatach Prusa Gedola L'chol HaSeuda. Then why did Ravina ask, this is Rav Tanut? There's no kash over here. He was cutting a Prusa Gedola for this Suda, and that's called Ayin Yafin. We have something called an Ayin Ra, and we have something called an Ayin Yafin. If Rabbi Zera felt that for this Suda we need 5 Kezesim, then instead of an Ayin Ra and being stingy and meager and cutting one size, he cut 5 Zesim. Why would the Gemara have any problem with it? What's the objection? Why is it considered gluttonous if he cut the amount that according to Rashi's interpretation he needed for that Seudah? That's not being gluttonous. So the Rashba has his own pshat in the Suda. It's the following. Rabbi Zera is talking about the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna. And when he says Akula Sherusa, what he meant was that Rabbi Zera was chote kol hakikros hamnachos lefanav. Rabbi Zera is disagreeing with Rav Kahana beforehand. Rav Kahana says that he should hold on to 2 kikros, but he should only cut one of the 2 kikros. The Rashba says that what Rabbi Zera meant was Akula Sherusa means Al Kol HaKikros, that he would cut all the kikros. And now Ravina asks the following question. You're taking 2 kikros and you're cutting them both simultaneously. That's very strange. That looks gluttonous. And on that, Rav Ashi responded, which you'll see here on page 41 if you're following the text, that this was a minhag that was limited to Shabbos, and therefore that's not Rav Tanusa. So let's just summarize. Whereas Rashi understands that Rav Kahana and Rav Zera were addressing 2 different issues, and there's certainly no machlokas between them. Rav Kahana, in the context of the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna, and as we said, to duplicate the nisim that took place in the man, he wants you to leave 1 kikar untouched. And Rabbi Zera is addressing a whole different issue. And that is, should a person be cutting a slice that has the volume that would last in the entire Suda or not? The Gemara, again, this is the weak point in Rashi, understood in the Havamim that Rabbi Zera's minhag, what it was a whole week long, it had nothing to do with Lechem Mishna. And he would advocate the whole week long to cut off a large piece, which would again be Ayin Tova as opposed to Ayin Ra. But the Gemara thought if you do this the whole week long, it really looks like you're a glutton. You're cutting such a large piece. What, are you going to stuff it in your mouth? And the Gemara answered, no. He only did this on Shabbos, and the reason for that is covered Shabbos the rest of the week. And therefore, since we saw him the rest of the week do it this way, and now he did it a different way on Shabbos, we know he's not being gluttonous. No machlokas between Rav Kahana and Rabbi Zera. The Rashba, on the other hand, rejects Rashi because what did the Gemara quote Rabbi Zera in this context, obviously it's got to be from the get-go a halacha in Lechem Mishna. And furthermore, if Rashi is correct, why would the Gemara object to an ayin yafer? That's like gluttony. And therefore, the Rashba presents a whole new thesis, a machlokes about how to fulfill the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna. And whereas Rav Kahana understood that mitzvah should be fulfilled by cutting one kikar and leaving the other complete, Rabbi Zera understood that the mitzvah required him to cut both kikros, and that is part of the mitzvah of Lechem Mishna. Lechem Mishna doesn't only mean to grab onto two shlemos, it means to slice the two shlemos. Now, I want to just fast forward for a moment. Let me just make a note of it that we have to come back to the tzlach on page 41. But I'd like to look at the minhag of the Gaon, which is on the bottom of page 41. Now, you know that there's a work which is considered very reliable called the Maaseh Rav, which is a compilation of testimony of the minhagim of the Gaon. This is a very small book that still to this day, especially here in Yerushalayim, has a tremendous impact on minhagim because Yerushalayim is very much reflective of the minhag of the Gaon. And the minhag of the Gaon was the following: Botzea shtei chalos shlemos, v'chotech shtehen biyachad, v'chein b'chol suda Shabbos, v'chein b'yomim tovim. There are a number of different chidushim here. We're going to focus only on one. First of all, the Gaon had a minhag to cut both kikros. Secondly, his minhag applied not just to Friday night and not just to Shabbos in the morning, but also to Shalosh Shudas, 3 times a day kol suda. And the third chiddush here is that the requirement of Lechem Mishna according to the Gaon applies not just to Shabbos but to Yom Tov as well. We're going to focus now, in the light of the machlokes between Rashi and the Rashba that we discussed, on the chiddush of the minhag hagon to cut both kikros. This reflects the Rashba's understanding of Rabbi Zera, according to which Rabbi Zera rejected Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana's position was that we cut only one of the 2 kikros. Rabbi Zera's position was we cut both of the 2 kikros, and the Gaon accepted the view of Rabbi Zera. So let's calculate what are the numbers that we need for all 3 kikros. We need 2 shlemos for each of 3 meals, totaling 6 shlemos. You go away for Shabbos, and you have to bring your own food, and you're a grunet. How many kikros, how many shlemos do you have to bring along with you in your satchel? No less than 6. Because at each one of 3 meals, you have to slice into 2 kikros. Again, I'm not advocating that you have to follow the minhag hagon. I'm just telling you, it's very fascinating. And before the Gaon, there was the Rashbeitz. And in his commentary on the Torah, here in our parsha, in the Man and B'Shalch, he writes, Gam b'sudash lishit, tzarech livtzoal shtei kikros. Like the Gaon, he required Lechem Mishna for Shalosh Shudas. The afal pishal ochaisa lifnei ochle aman bos hashah ki im seuda achas. Meaning, they collected on Friday a double portion of man, and therefore on Friday night they would eat one of the omers, right? One omer's worth of man, leaving over another omer for Shabbos in the morning. There was no third omer for Shalosh Shudas. Mikol Makom yesh laso zichron l'nes Lechem Mishna in every one of the Sudas of Shabbos. So that the sheet of the Rashbeit is difficult, is challenging, because if Lechem Mishna serves the purpose of a resemblance, to reenact, that's the word I want, to reenact the miracle of the man, then the number 6 and the Suda Shlishis is out of the question. But the answer is it became a chiyuv in the Su'uda. And if the Su'uda requires 2 kikros, and we accept Rabbi Zera, the way the Rashba understood Rabbi Zera, that you have to cut both kikros, then each Suda of Shabbos has to be elevated to the status of Kavod Shabbos. And Kavod Shabbos means that at that Su'uda, to convert it into a Suda Shabbos, I have to do a reenactment of the miracle of Lechem Mishna. And now I add Rabbi Zera into the equation, and I have to cut both kikros. And it's fascinating that the Medrash, which you'll see on the bottom of your page 41, on Sefer Tehillim, speaks about the Shabbos, that everything on Shabbos is double. Kol iska shel Shabbos kaful. Right? There was an Omer times 2. And there was Zachar and Shama. The Yom HaShabbos Shnei Kvasim. The Karban of Shabbos had 2 kvasim. And in the Onesh, Rahman al-Islam, for desecrating the Shabbos, the Torah says, Mos Yuhos. And the Medrash says that anything to do with Shabbos is always written in numbers of 2. And if that be the case, then every Seudah of Shabbos should reflect the number 2 and should have 2 omrim of man, which means 2 kikros shlemos. And that's a zecher to the 2 omrim of man, the double portion of man that fell on Friday. So I say, Rabbosai, today we covered maybe half of this essay. I'm pretty sure I sent you, David, just double check. I think I sent you all the pages of the essay. The last page is page 44. And we'll try to finish this up in Mirza Hashem next week. But at least as far as I'm concerned, I begin to have a new understanding of Lechem Mishna. I mean, it's so much more meaningful to me today. And I thank you all for joining me, because if you weren't here, I probably wouldn't have gone through this essay. So I'd like to dedicate next Wednesday to finish up on Lechem Mishna, and then perhaps offer an introduction to the next topic. So please hold on to these pages in your WhatsApp or your email, wherever you have them, so we don't have to bother David to send them out again unless he wants to, whatever's easier for him. And you'll have it for next week, and we'll wrap this all up in Mirza Hashem.
Thank you, Rav.
Thank you so much. I just want to, unless you have to run, I just want to say a few words about Meyer, all the shalom on his yahrzeit. I love this man. I'm not fundraising. As Bobby would say if he would see I'm the worst fundraiser in the world. He can't accuse me of anything other than the fact that I adored the man. I also adored Sam Nussbaum, by the way, for a different reason. But when we talk about Meyer Zeifman, I mean, besides his accomplishments in life, I mean, the man is left a legacy and what he created just in the physical universe, but I'm talking on a spiritual level. And in two ways, his love for Torah, his thirst for Torah was atypical of a man coming from that world. His bikush, his desire, and every turn to go to a shir, again, I only know a fraction of it. But I remember when I offered to learn Chavrusa with him, and what's it called? Is it called Yad Bin? Not Yad Bin. What's it called?
Yemin Moshe.
Yemin Moshe. Sorry, Yemin Moshe. My biggest challenge was the parking over there. I mean, it's like wild, and it was just a pleasure. But the second midah is his joy in life, his happiness, his smile that was so contagious. See, Ratzon, he should have an aliyas neshama. I'm sure he is up there with the greats and close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Olam HaEmes. He should have an aliyas neshama and nachas and a great legacy that he left for the entire Zayfim Mishpach.
Amen. 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 Thank you. Have a great day. All the best.